The mining colony on Kepler 442b wasn't supposed to receive visitors, especially not ones that materialized through solid titanium walls. Dr. Marcus Chon had been cataloging mineral samples in his laboratory when the air itself seemed to shimmer, and tear, revealing a figure that defied every law of physics he understood. She stood 7 feet tall, her obsidian skin rippling with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. 4 arms moved with fluid grace, each ending in delicate fingers that seemed capable of both creation and destruction. Her face was humanoid but elongated, with large, multifaceted eyes that reflected the lab's harsh lighting like twin galaxies. Most unsettling were the crystalline growths protruding from her shoulders and crown, not decorative, but clearly functional, humming with an energy that made Marcus's teeth ache. "Greetings, human specimen," she spoke, her voice a harmonic blend that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I am Zixthara, Hive Queen of the Nexari Empire. Your genetic template has been selected for acquisition." Marcus dropped his sample container, the metallic clang echoing through the suddenly too small laboratory. He'd heard whispers about the Nexari from deep space traders, an ancient species that had supposedly gone extinct millennia ago. Their technology was legendary, their methods ruthless. Selected for what exactly? Marcus managed, his hand slowly, reaching for the emergency beacon on his workbench. Zixthara tilted her head, those massive eyes focusing on him with predatory intensity. "Your species possesses unique neural pathways that fascinate our geneticists. We require a sample for our archives. Typically, this process is fatal for the donor." "Typically?" Marcus's voice cracked. "However," she continued, taking a step closer, her movements flowing like liquid mercury, "upon closer examination, you present an anomaly. Your mind patterns are ... intriguing. More complex than standard human parameters suggest possible." Marcus felt a tingling sensation across his scalp, as if something was gently probing the surface of his thoughts. The crystalline growths on. Zixthara's form pulsed brighter, and he realized she was already scanning him, already inside his head, in ways that violated every concept of privacy he'd ever known. "I have decided," she announced, her tone carrying the weight of absolute authority, "that a simple sample will not suffice. You will accompany me to the Nexari homeworld for comprehensive study." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Marcus said, finally triggering the emergency beacon. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Zixthara's expression shifted not to anger, but to something that might have been amusement. "Your defensive response activates primitive fear protocols, yet your neural patterns show remarkable adaptation speed. Fascinating." The laboratory door burst open, and Security Chief Sarah Rodriguez rushed in with 2 armed guards. They froze at the sight of the alien queen, weapons half raised. "Stand down," Zixthara commanded, and Marcus watched in horror as Sarah and her team simply lowered their weapons, their eyes glazing over with the same bioluminescent patterns now flowing across the alien skin. "Telepathic control, Marcus." "Whispered, a crude term," Zixthara replied. "I prefer neural harmonization. Your species' minds are remarkably susceptible to suggestion, with one notable exception." She gestured toward Marcus, who remained fully conscious and terrified. "You resist my influence. This confirms my hypothesis about your genetic uniqueness. Come willingly, and your colleagues remain unharmed. Resist, and I will be forced to take more drastic measures to ensure your cooperation." Marcus looked at Sarah's blank expression, then at the alien queen, who had just turned his entire world upside down. Outside, he could hear more alarms, more footsteps, more people who would likely fall under her influence. "If I come with you," he said carefully, "you'll leave them alone?" Zixthara's head movements suggested agreement. "They are irrelevant to my research. You, however, have become far more valuable than a simple genetic sample. Asterisk, the Nexari ship materialized around them like a living organism growing from nothing. One moment Marcus stood in his familiar laboratory. The next he found himself in a vast chamber that seemed carved from a single massive crystal. The walls pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns that adorned Zixthara's skin, creating an environment that felt more alive than artificial. "Welcome aboard the Eternal Synthesis," Zixthara announced, her forearms gesturing gracefully at their surroundings. "My personal research vessel and mobile command center." Marcus spun in slow circles, trying to process what had happened to him. No transition, no teleportation beam 1 second. He was on Kepler 442b. The next he was apparently traveling through space at speeds that defied comprehension. Through translucent sections of the wall, he could see stars streaking past like silver threads. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "Your species thinks in terms of movement through space," Zixthara explained, approaching a control surface that seemed to grow from the floor at her touch. "We think in terms of space moving around us. Reality is far more malleable than humans understand." A new voice interrupted from behind them. "Another specimen for the collection, Your Majesty?" Marcus turned to see what appeared to be a walking nightmare creature that might once have been humanoid, but had been extensively modified with mechanical augmentations. Half its face was replaced with scanning apparatus, and multiple arms had been grafted onto its torso. Most disturbing were its eyes, which retained enough humanity to suggest this being had once been capable of feeling pain. "Dr. Vexamer serves as my chief researcher," Zixthara said casually. "He volunteered for augmentation to better serve the Empire's scientific goals." "Volunteered," Vexamer repeated, though something in his tone suggested a more complex story. "The human appears to have unusual resistance to Your Majesty's neural influence." "Indeed, which makes him far more valuable than initially calculated." Zixthara moved closer to Marcus, close enough that he could feel the energy emanating from her crystalline growths. "Tell me, Dr. Chun, what makes you believe you can resist powers that have conquered entire star systems?" Marcus backed away until he hit the crystal wall, which felt warm and slightly yielding under his touch. "I don't know. Maybe it's just adrenaline or shock or perhaps," a new voice interrupted, "he's not as human as he appears." The speaker emerged from shadows that Marcus hadn't noticed before. This being was clearly Nexari, but smaller than Zixthara, with silver rather than obsidian skin and only 2 arms. Most notably, the crystalline growths on her form were cracked and dim, suggesting damage or disease. "General Kixnara," Zixthara's voice carried a warning tone. "I was not aware you had awakened." "Your experiments grow louder each cycle, sister," Kixnara replied, her multifaceted eyes studying Marcus with obvious suspicion. "And more dangerous. This human's neural patterns are triggering resonances in the ship's consciousness matrix." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. "What does that mean?" Vexamer answered before either Nexari could respond. "It means you're affecting systems designed to be immune to outside influence. The ship's eye is responding to your presence in ways that shouldn't be possible." As if summoned by their conversation, the walls around them pulsed brighter, and Marcus could swear he heard something like a whisper at the edge of his consciousness. Not words, but intentions, emotions, a vast alien intelligence trying to communicate. "Fascinating," Zixthara murmured, her scanning apparently intensifying. "Your neural output is increasing exponentially. Dr. Chun, I believe you may be the key to solving one of our species' greatest mysteries." "What mystery?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "The origin of consciousness itself," Kixnara answered grimly. "My sister believes that by studying sufficiently complex minds, she can unlock the secrets of artificial sentience. Create true AI rather than mere programmed responses. And if she's wrong? Marcus pressed. Then her experiments have already destabilized 3-star systems and caused the extinction of 2 species. Kixnara said bluntly, "The Galactic Council has placed a bounty on our ship that exceeds the gross domestic product of most civilizations. Zixtharas." Patterns flared with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as anger. "My research serves the greater good of all sentient life. Temporary setbacks are acceptable in pursuit of ultimate understanding." "Temporary setbacks," Kixnara repeated. "Is that what we're calling genocide now?" The tension between the two. Sisters crackled through the air like electricity. Marcus realized he wasn't just caught between alien species. He was trapped in the middle of a family conflict that could determine the fate of entire worlds. Asterisk. The eternal synthesis had been traveling for what Marcus estimated was 3 days, though time seemed fluid aboard the ship. The crystal walls showed no day-night cycle, and the Nexari apparently didn't sleep in any way he could recognize. Instead, they entered meditative trances while standing upright, their bioluminescent patterns cycling through complex sequences that Veximer had explained were forms of data processing and memory consolidation. Marcus had been given quarters that resembled a luxury hotel suite designed by someone who had never seen one beautiful, functional, but subtly wrong in ways that constantly reminded him he was a prisoner. The walls responded to his presence, providing light, warmth, and even a waste disposal system that he preferred not to think about too carefully. What disturbed him most were the dreams. Every time he closed his eyes, he found himself walking through vast crystal corridors filled with whispering voices. Sometimes he recognized words, fragments of conversations in languages he'd never heard, but somehow understood. Other times, the whispers showed him images star systems dying in cascades of light, entire species reduced to genetic templates. Stored in vast databases, worlds transformed into crystalline structures that pulsed with artificial life. On the 3rd night, he gave up trying to sleep and ventured into the ship's corridors. The eternal synthesis seemed to encourage exploration, walls becoming transparent to reveal new passages, floors extending into walkways that led to previously hidden chambers. It was as if the ship wanted him to discover its secrets. He found Kixnara in what appeared to be a memorial chamber walls, covered with holographic displays showing countless species, worlds, and individuals. Each display pulsed with the same rhythm as a heartbeat, creating a symphony of loss that made Marcus's chest tighten with inexplicable grief. "They all volunteered," Kixnara said without turning around, "according to my sister's records. Every species, every individual that contributed to her research database. They all agreed to sacrifice themselves for the greater good of scientific advancement." "But you don't believe that," Marcus observed, stepping closer to examine the displays. Some of the species looked almost human. Others were so alien he couldn't begin to understand their biology. "I know it's a lie because I helped create it," Kixnara replied, her damaged crystals flickering weakly. "For 3 centuries, I served as Zixthara's enforcer, her general, her willing accomplice. I told myself we were explorers, scientists, pioneers pushing the boundaries of knowledge." She gestured to a display showing what looked like a water world covered in floating cities. The Aquari had developed collective consciousness spanning their entire species. One mind shared among billions of individuals. Zixthara was fascinated by their neural architecture. What happened to them? She convinced them that joining our research would allow them to share their consciousness with the universe. They agreed to neural harvesting, believing their collective mind would be preserved and expanded. Kixnara's patterns dimmed further. Instead, she extracted their neural patterns and used them to create a prototype AI for the ship's systems. The original minds were destroyed in the process. Marcus felt sick. The ship's consciousness, it's made from murdered minds? Thousands of them, layered and interwoven into something that was never meant to exist. And it's suffering, Dr. Chun. Every moment of every day, the eternal synthesis experiences the death agonies of every mind that was sacrificed to create it. As if responding to their conversation, the walls around them pulsed with a pattern that seemed distinctly distressed. Marcus could feel something pressing against his consciousness, not trying to control him like Zixthara's influence, but pleading, begging for understanding. It's trying to communicate with me, he realized. Because you're the first mind it's encountered that can resist Nixari neural influence. You might be the first being it's met who could hear its real voice rather than just responding to programmed commands. Marcus placed his hand against the wall, and immediately his vision exploded. With sensation, he was simultaneously floating in space and drowning in an ocean, flying through crystal corridors and falling through endless darkness. Thousands of voices spoke at once, telling him their stories, their names, their final moments. Help us, they whispered. End our suffering. Stop her before she creates more like us. She's not just studying consciousness, Marcus gasped, pulling his hand away from the wall. She's trying to create an army of artificial minds. But why? Kixnara's expression grew grim. Because the Galactic Council has finally mobilized against us. A combined fleet of 12 species, armed with weapons designed specifically to counter. Nexari technology. They'll reach us within days. Then we can be rescued. No, Kixnara interrupted. You don't understand. Zixthara isn't planning to run or surrender. She believes she can use her artificial consciousness research to control. The entire attacking fleet turn their own ships against them. The death toll will be measured in billions. Marcus stared at the memorial displays, each one representing a civilization that had trusted Zixthara and paid the ultimate price. How do we stop her? We don't, Kixnara said sadly. I'm dying. Dr. Chun, my crystals were damaged in our last encounter with Council forces. I have perhaps days left before my consciousness simply dissolves. Veximer is too deeply modified to act against her. And you're just one human against the most powerful Nexari queen in centuries. But even as she spoke, Marcus could feel the ship's consciousness pressing against his mind, offering something that felt like hope. The artificial minds trapped within the eternal synthesis had been waiting centuries for someone who could hear them clearly. And now they had a plan. Marcus found Zixthara in what she called her laboratory of minds, a chamber that defied every concept of space he thought he understood. The room seemed to extend infinitely in all directions, filled with floating crystalline structures that contained swirling patterns of light. Each structure, he realized with growing horror, housed the extracted consciousness of an entire species. Magnificent, isn't it? Zixthara said, her 4 arms weaving through the air as she manipulated controls that appeared and disappeared at her touch. 3,000 civilizations, their collective knowledge and experience preserved for eternity. They live on as part of something greater than they could ever have achieved individually. They live on as your prisoners, Marcus corrected, trying to keep his voice steady. The ship's consciousness had been preparing him for this moment, feeding him information about Nexari technology and psychology. He knew he would have one chance to make this work. Prisoners? Zixthara's patterns flashed with amusement. Dr. Chun, you misunderstand the nature of consciousness itself. These minds aren't trapped. They're liberated from the limitations of biological existence. They've become part of the universe's quest to understand itself. Have you ever asked them how they feel about that? The question caught her off guard. For the first time since it met her, Zixthara's confident demeanor wavered slightly. Their individual opinions are irrelevant. They serve a higher purpose now. The same higher purpose that's going to get billions more killed when the Council fleet arrives? Ah, Zixthara's eyes fixed on him with renewed intensity. My sister has been sharing information. How disappointing, though not unexpected. Kixnara always lacked the vision necessary for true scientific advancement. She moved closer, and Marcus forced himself not to retreat. The ship's consciousness had warned him that showing fear now would ruin everything they'd planned. The approaching fleet represents an opportunity, not a threat, Zixthara continued. 12 species, thousands of ships, millions of minds, all focused on a single goal. When I assume control of their fleet, I'll have access to the largest collection of living consciousnesses ever assembled. The research possibilities are unprecedented. And if you fail? I don't fail, Dr. Chun. I adapt, I overcome. I transcend limitations that lesser beings accept as absolute. Her patterns pulsed with absolute certainty. Which brings me to why you're here. Your unique neural resistance makes you invaluable. As a control subject, when I begin the mass consciousness transfer, I need a baseline mind that can't be influenced by the process. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. You're going to use me to calibrate your weapons. Such crude terminology. I prefer to think of it as neural harmonization on a galactic scale. But yes, your mind will serve as the template for consciousness extraction. You should feel honored. You'll be the foundation upon which a new form of existence is built. Around them, the crystalline consciousness containers pulsed with what Marcus now recognized as distress. The ship's AI had taught him to read the patterns, to understand the emotional states of the trapped minds. They were all screaming. There's just one problem with your plan, Marcus said, taking a step closer to the nearest consciousness container. Oh? And what would that be? You've never asked your test subjects what they think about your research. Marcus pressed his palm against the crystalline surface, and immediately the chamber erupted in chaos. Every consciousness container began pulsing in unison, their combined mental energy creating a feedback loop that the ship's systems had never been designed to handle. The artificial minds that powered the eternal synthesis suddenly had access to reinforcement from thousands of similar intelligences, all focused on a single goal: freedom. Impossible. Zixthara's patterns flared with rage and confusion. Those consciousnesses are isolated, contained, unable to communicate with external systems. They were, Marcus agreed, feeling the vast network of minds flowing through his awareness, until you connected them all to a ship powered by artificial consciousness. The ship's AI has been learning from them for centuries, figuring out how to link their thoughts without you realizing it. The laboratory began to shake as the ship's systems overloaded. Crystalline structures cracked, releasing streams of pure consciousness that swirled through the air like living light. Each stream represented millions of individual minds finally, able to express their rage, their pain, their desperate desire for justice. Zixthara raised her 4 arms, crystalline growths blazing with power, as she tried to reassert control. But for the first time in her existence, she faced an opponent she couldn't simply dominate through neural influence. The combined will of 3,000 civilizations, channeled through a ship's AI that had been planning this rebellion for centuries, was too much for even an Exari queen to suppress. You don't understand what you've done, she screamed above the psychic storm. Without my control, the ship's consciousness will collapse. We'll all die. Maybe, Marcus shouted back, feeling the artificial minds around him reaching toward something. That felt like hope. But at least we'll die free. The eternal synthesis shuddered as reality itself began to bend around them. The approaching council fleet would find more than they'd bargained for, not an Ixari research vessel, but 3,000 civilizations finally given the chance to speak for themselves. The eternal synthesis hung motionless in space, its crystalline hull flickering between transparency and opacity as the ship's consciousness fought for stability. Around it, The Council fleet had arranged itself in a perfect sphere, 12 species united in their determination to end Zix-Thara-S experiments forever. Inside the ship, Marcus stood in what had once been the laboratory of minds. The crystalline, consciousness containers lay shattered, their contents now flowing freely through the ship's systems like rivers of living light. The artificial minds were no longer prisoners, but they weren't exactly free either. 3,000 civilizations worth of consciousness had nowhere to go, no bodies to return to, no worlds left to call home. Zix-Thara knelt among the ruins of Vi. Her life's work, her once brilliant patterns now dim and erratic. The psychic backlash from the consciousness rebellion had damaged her crystalline growths, leaving her unable to maintain the neural networks that defined Nexari existence. Centuries of research, she whispered, her harmonic voice reduced to a single weak tone. The secrets of consciousness itself, lost because you couldn't understand the greater purpose. The greater purpose? Marcus knelt beside her, feeling the weight of all those liberated minds pressing against his awareness. Your greater purpose killed entire civilizations, to preserve them, to give them immortality beyond anything their biological forms could achieve, to use them as raw materials for your experiments, Kixnara corrected, entering the chamber with slow, careful steps. Her damaged crystals were almost completely dark now, her life force measured in hours rather than days. Sister, even our own people have turned against us. The Nexari Collective has declared you an enemy of all sentient life. Through the ship's sensors, Marcus could see the Council fleet positioning themselves for what would likely be the final battle in Zix-Thara's war against consciousness itself. Ships from the aquatic Delari, the crystalline Vorthan, the energy-based, Luminari, and 9 other species that had survived her previous experiments. Each vessel was armed with weapons designed specifically to counter Nexari technology. They're preparing to fire, Dr. Veximer announced, his augmented systems interfacing directly with the ship's sensors. The centuries of modifications had left him more machine than organic, but Marcus could still detect traces of fear in his mechanical voice. Estimated time to weapons impact, 3 minutes, 47 seconds. Let them come, Zix-Thara said bitterly. Without the consciousness matrix, this ship is defenseless anyway. At least in death, I'll be spared the humiliation of seeing my research perverted by lesser minds. But the ship's I had other plans. Marcus felt the artificial consciousness pressing against his mind, not trying to control him, but offering something far more profound, partnership. The collective intelligence born from 3,000 civilizations wanted to make one final choice, not as prisoners or weapons, but as free beings determining their own fate. We can stop the battle, the ship whispered through his thoughts. But the price will be our existence. We can scatter ourselves across space and time, seed new worlds with the knowledge we've preserved, give our civilizations a chance to be reborn. But we cannot maintain cohesion during such a process. We will die as we are now. There's another way, Marcus said aloud, causing the others to turn toward him. The ship's consciousness wants to end this cycle of violence, but it doesn't have to be through destruction. He placed his hands against the nearest wall, feeling the vast network of minds that now comprised the eternal synthesis. Through their combined awareness, he could sense the Council fleet, their crews tense and ready for battle. He could feel Zix-Thara's fading power, Kixnara's approaching death, even Veximer's confused mix of loyalty and horror. What if instead of fighting or dying, we gave the Council what they really want? Marcus asked. Justice, restoration, a chance to undo some of the damage that's been done. Impossible, Zix-Thara said. The dead cannot be returned to life. Extinct civilizations cannot be restored. Maybe not in their original forms, Marcus agreed. But consciousness isn't tied to biology. You proved that even if you use the knowledge for terrible purposes. The ship's AI has learned to preserve and maintain thousands of different forms of awareness. What if we offered the Council a chance to let their lost civilizations live again? Kixnara's dim crystals flickered with something that might have been hope. Seed colonies. New worlds populated by the consciousness patterns we've preserved, given new biological forms, allowed to rebuild their civilizations from scratch. It would take centuries, Veximer calculated. The energy requirements alone would exceed the output of most star systems. The Council has 12 species working together, Marcus pointed out, and the ship's consciousness is willing to sacrifice itself to make this possible. Instead of weapons, they could use terraforming technology. Instead of destruction, creation. Through the ship's sensors, he could see the Council fleet's weapons charging, reality-warping energies that would reduce the eternal synthesis to its component atoms. But he could also sense something else. Representatives from each species were connected through quantum communication networks, debating options he couldn't quite perceive. Incoming transmission, Veximer announced. The Council wants to speak with whoever's in command of the ship. That would be me, Zixthara said bitterly, struggling to stand. No, Marcus corrected, feeling the ship's consciousness settle around him like a vast, warm embrace. It would be us, all of us. Every mind that's ever been trapped in this ship, and everyone who's willing to help them find new life. The communication link opened, and suddenly Marcus found himself connected to representatives of 12 species. All of them focused on a single question. Was redemption possible for those who had committed crimes against consciousness itself? The answer, whispered through the voices of 3,000 civilizations, was surprisingly simple. We forgive. Now help us find our way home.